It's actually a great Tiffany window at the Yale Library. It has science and religion, light, love, and light in her halo. It's a very cool window. But that's not what we're looking at. We're going to look at, all right, welcome everyone. One of the reasons I'm using this chart, not only because it was recommended by a student, is there is an advantage to studying the charts of celebrities. On one hand, unless they're a client, there's no issues of confidentiality. And with celebrities, one can find online bios. I want to encourage all of you students to do research on the Astro Data Bank and look for AA data for charts. Let's use some of our general tools of chart interpretation, and let's take an overall look at this chart. Tonight we could do something more brief on the natal chart and then move on to progressions to get a sense of some of the key events of this woman's life. Finding key events in her life that we could progress the chart to and see what planetary energies may have been operating at the time of those events. Let's do some generals. One thing we normally look for is retrograde or stationary planets. What do we see? So Saturn is retrograde in the 8th house, Uranus retrograde in the 11th house. The only reason we're looking at this is that retrograde planets show somewhat repressed qualities that come out later in life. So these are areas that receive fuller expression as the soul gains in years and matures. We also look at planets above the horizon and planets below the horizon. This is easy to determine. The horizon line runs from the ascendant to the descendant and forms the horizontal line across the center of the chart. Now, isn't this unusual in the chart of a public person? If the chart is predominantly below the horizon, which tends to operate stealth, these are people who tend to move behind the scenes. In her day and age, was very well known. And we're able to find biographical information on her now. Here, there's a stellium. In the 4th house of the chart, when that happens, you can have powerful aspects to the midheaven. And in the case of this chart, there are oppositions to the midheaven from Mercury, from Jupiter, and from Neptune. So all of those planets are lending energy to the midheaven, which can be one's visibility in the chart. Even though her midheaven is not that powerful, there are significant aspects going on there. Which are the personal houses? 12, 1, 2, and 3. So here, how many planets do we have in personal houses? We have 3 planets in personal houses. Houses of companionship, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We have 5 planets there. And then the public houses, 8, 9, 10, and 11. We have 2 planets there. So, if we look at the summary on the Astrodyne sheet, we can see that companionship houses are most powerful at 43.7% of the chart. Not unexpected, since half of the planets fall in houses of companionship. What will that tell us about someone? They like being around people, and judging from the house activity, what people do we think that she would like to be around? Family and companions and spouse, maybe partner. Because the active houses are the 4th and the 7th. What about the fact, if we look at the discord in this chart, the public houses are the most discordant. I never remember much scandal surrounding Patsy in her life, but I do find it curious that in the way her memory lives on, besides all of the incredible music, we remember her for an untimely death. We remember her for a disaster.
How did she die?
Plane crash. Her father died of cirrhosis of the liver, so that's often an indicator in alcoholism, though not exclusively so. I also believe her father was about 26 years older than her mother.
Wow.
Do you read Saturn retrograde as some kind of distance with the father?
I don't know that I would ever have come up with that interpretation. In Hermetic astrology, we look at the 4th house as ruling the father and the 10th house the mother. The way that came about is during the years of the Church of Light Astrological Research Department, what Zane noticed was that at the death of the father, there were progressed aspects involving the 8th house and the 4th house, and upon the death of a mother, there were aspects involving the 10th house and the 8th house. Traditionally, the sun is also one of the factors that's looked at in the chart as representing the father, just because, in general, the sun represents male authority figures, and the moon being the more feminine maternal figures. So those are two other factors we look at parent. So I don't know if I'd necessarily look at Saturn retrograde as a distance from the father, but I'm sure if we progress the chart to that early age, we may find some indicators showing changes in her home. I would actually surmise, looking at this chart, Alice Marie, that since the 4th house is dominant, almost 31% of her energy, 4 planets fall there, Mercury in Leo, Jupiter, Neptune, Sun in Virgo, that the father was an important figure, and his loss could have impacted her greatly. Because this is strong and harmonious, there's a good chance that there was initially a good relationship there between the two of them. But again, I've not done much research on this chart. I actually left that up to all of you as students for your homework to come up with the facts about Patsy Cline. So let's look at the next division, which are the trinities: life, wealth, association, psychism, which are the houses belonging to the trinity of life.
The fire houses.
So 1, 5, and 9. And what planets do you see there? Nada, zilch, nothing. As shows up on the Astrodyne report, the houses of life have only 11.6% of the power. They are the weakest in her chart. Houses of wealth, they would correspond in a natural chart to the earth signs. 2, 6, and 10. What falls in wealth in this chart?
A lot.
Yes, we have 3 planets. We have Mars, Pluto in Cancer, and Venus in Leo, all in the second house. So the second house is prominent in her chart and one of the areas of greatest discord. But if we look at the houses of wealth, they are the second most powerful at 30.4% of her power, and they are the most discordant at a minus 73.79 discordines. The houses of association correspond in a natural chart to the air signs. This is house 3, 7, 11. How many planets? I actually only, yes, we have 2. The moon in Capricorn in the 7th, Uranus in Aries. So, houses of association, 19.3% of the power. And lastly, the houses of psychism, which are 4, 8, and 12. We have 5 planets. Mercury, Jupiter, Neptune, Sun in the 4th, Saturn in the 8th. So a strong emphasis in this chart might fall into areas that might be seen as more emotional, intuitive, impressionable, sensitive, and otherworldly in some ways. The greater amount of the energy in her chart. The houses of psychism have 38.7%, which rank highest among the trinities. So that now we look at the elements in a chart. Elements are really important because elements determine temperament. Our temperament will guide us according to the type of career we choose, the type of people we get along with, and the way in which we express ourselves in our personality. Fire signs tend to be energetic and enthusiastic. Earth signs, pragmatic, practical, slow-moving. Air signs, intellectual and social. And water signs, emotional and intuitive. Let's look at 4 fire signs in her chart. I spy Uranus in Aries and Mercury in Leo, but I don't see any planets in Sagittarius. So there's 2 planets in fire, and fire in her chart has 27.4%. That would explain, the 3 planets in fire would explain why fire is so prominent in this chart. The earth signs, 3 in Virgo and 2 in Capricorn, so that's 5. That appears to dominate her chart at 34%. What could we say about her as predominantly earth? Okay, so her pragmatism may have expressed towards her family and towards shouldering responsibilities early on. So that's a good analysis. The air signs, there are no planets there, but the ascendant and the midheaven. The ascendant's in Gemini, the midheaven is in Aquarius. And almost equal in strength is water. And because she has 2 planets in water, Mars and Pluto, in a very close conjunction. So this chart is predominantly earth and fire, often described as incompatible elements. Are fire signs concerned about practicality?
No.
No. What are they interested in?
Dynamic.
Inspiration.
Inspiration. And earth signs. Are they interested in highfalutin ideas?
No, they're more like Mr. Spock.
Or show me the money? So I look at this as it's sort of like a hot air balloon with ballast. It wants to soar, but it's hard to get off the ground because the earth dominates.
That the fire part of her was the inspirational part and had the ideas. The earth part allowed her, helped her to bring it about in reality.
She was extremely successful, despite the fact that it wasn't an easy life, I think, but she sure got known. She let her passions be heard, far and wide.
So here's a case where you can have disparate elements and get them to work for you. And again, it's passion backed up by practicality. All right. Now let's look at movable, fixed, and mutable, because this tells us about an individual's adaptability. Movable signs: Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. What do we see? Uranus in Aries, Mars and Pluto in Cancer. So 5 planets in movable signs. No surprise that movable signs are dominant, but they're almost evenly dispersed in this chart, because movable signs have 35.5%, mutable signs 34%, and fixed signs 30%.
I don't understand I don't know how to think about the fact that Jupiter, Neptune, and the Sun are all intercepted.
Well, they generally represent latent qualities, except in this chart they're also dominant influences, not the Sun, but the Jupiter and Neptune are. So they're intercepted.
Are Jupiter and Neptune dominant because of the tighter opposition with the midheaven?
I believe they're dominant because they fall in an angular house.
So
They form a very close aspect called a conjunction, which makes for prominence. They form most of the same aspects. They both conjunct the Sun, they both trine the Moon, they both conjunct Mercury, they both semi-square Mars, they conjunct one another. So they're basically engaged in a number of aspects and in the same aspects. So that adds to their power in the chart. But again, back to movable, we've looked at. Mutable, of course, is Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces. Virgo is the only mutability in the chart. But mutable people tend to be adapters. So here we see mutable comes next. Movable signs like to get things started, get things going, get things active. Mutable signs like to adapt. So a person who's dominantly movable, well, one thing we know about Patsy is she was the lead singer, which is movable. Mutable is being able to work with other people. So if you work with musicians, work in a group, work with backup singers, work with recorders, recording engineers, technical people, there's some adaptability that's required there. Fixed signs are perfecters. They don't like to yield or change or alter things. And all of these is almost equal in strength. So they each hold close to a third of her power. What are the fixed signs? Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. And I forgot when I mentioned the mutable signs, she has Gemini rising, which makes for a very adaptable personality. So Venus in Leo, Mercury in Leo, midheaven in Aquarius. Let's just go down the astrodynes in her chart and look at influences. Rather than going around the chart and looking at each of the houses and how they're impacted, let's go through the astrodyne report and use that as our guiding delineation tool tonight. Dominant planet? Neptune, whenever you have a dominant planet, it determines the planetary family to which you belong. Persons with the utopian urges dominant tend to be dreamers and schemers. You know, they have big dreams. They're always imagining a better world, whether it's their world or whether it's the larger world. Neptune is oftentimes prominent in the charts of dramatists and performers. You've got to have a dream, you've got to have drama, you have to have charisma, presentation, and to be a good performer, you have to be able to hold the imagination of the audience. Neptune loves costumes and dress up. What are the best qualities of Neptune? It's the qualities of idealism. Again, it's that ability to imagine things being better, and guess what? The world does not get better unless there are some people out there imagining how it's going to get better. So we are dependent on the visionaries in our lives, in our culture, in our communities, to change things.
Well, it's Neptune rules Pisces, which is empathetic and automatically feels for people in the universal sense, I think.
Yes, and Neptune also rules feeling, extrasensory perception. The greater our feeling and the greater our imagination, the easier it is to be more empathetic. They've done studies which actually show that people who read a lot of books, especially in the realm of literature, become more empathetic people. Part of the reason for that is they're able to place themselves in the characters, the situations, the scenarios of other people.
I have heard in other places that Neptune is associated with the arts, culture, or music specifically, but Neptune being sort of the universal ocean, music is known as the universal language. It's not dependent on any specific knowledge of any specific language.
Mm-hmm.
So it taps us into that universal ocean in that feeling way.
So it does have its own language,
Music.
which is the written music.
Yeah, but
Which
it's not dependent on that.
Some people can read the language, other people can hear and have skills where they can
Yeah.
immediately pick up on that. They can play by ear.
Yeah, but other people anywhere in the world can just get it.
She could play piano by ear.
Okay,
That's
and
a
that
good-
could, yeah,
that's
that could come
interesting.
through that Neptune, that feeling sense. What about the worst qualities of Neptune?
Illusion, delusion, drugs.
Dissipation.
All right, illusion, delusion, drugs, dissipation.
Promise telling the truth.
But again, Neptune's in the fourth house, and sometimes when you have an example of addiction or alcoholism in the home, if one is raised with that parent, oftentimes children will make conscious decisions of, I don't want to be like that. However, if the child is raised apart from an addicted parent, it's not that unusual for the child to express addictions because they don't have that conditioning in their environment that they're rebelling against. They give in to the line of least resistance.
And or they can unconsciously recreate the lessons that living with an alcoholic brings them in their life grapple with alcoholism, whether in herself, I'm not clear, but certainly in relationships. Yeah.
That was Jessica Lag played her.
Right. She played Patsy, and she did a very good job, as I recall.
Yeah, she did.
The next powerful planet in the chart is Jupiter, the religious urges of the soul. Also here in the 4th house. Conjunct Neptune.
So the Neptune qualities are really enhanced, right?
Yes, you've got the religious urges and the utopian urges combined, which can create great optimism. Well, if you're going to make it in the entertainment world, you need that.
Yeah. And
Competition
she
is
started
great.
singing in church.
Excellent. Again, there may have been a strong religious environment within the family. Her creative expression was first discovered or expressed through religious outlets. My guess, anyone with a dominant Jupiter does have a belief in a higher power, generally. So this may be something that occupied her life. I also believe that I've read statements that she was incredibly generous. That whatever she had, she would help others, her friends, or whoever was in need. Did anyone else come across that in their researches?
Yes, it's said that even when she didn't have it, she'd spend it, and not always on herself. She'd give anyone the skirt off her backside if they needed it.
Okay.
The skirt off her backside.
The religious urges expressed best as benevolence and worst as conceit. The third dominant planet is Mercury. Intellectual urges. Language, calculation, memory. Best quality of Mercury is expression. The worst quality can be
You could
nervousness, or again, anxiety, thinking too much. Mercury's powerful and harmonious, mildly harmonious, but nevertheless. And it appears that Mercury also falls in conjunction with Jupiter and Neptune. So her mental processes, even though Mercury's in Leo, her mental processes are in a prominence compound with Jupiter and Neptune, being devotional and inspirational. I don't believe she was a songwriter, just a performer, and that most of the great works she did were performing other people's songs. But one might suspect, with the dominant Mercury conjunct Neptune, that she could have written some. All right, let's talk about the most harmonious planet in her chart. But we can also easily find the most harmonious and the most discordant planets by sorting them by harmony. So we can see Moon is most harmonious, and Saturn most discordant. They're both in Capricorn. Rarely do we consider the Moon in Capricorn harmonious. Why is that?
It's in its fall.
It's in its fall, it's fallen, and it can't get up. It's opposite its home sign of Cancer. How could this be so harmonious? Well, the Moon trines the Sun, the Moon trines Mercury, the Moon trines Jupiter, the Moon trines Neptune, and the Moon doesn't make any other aspects. So that's where the harmony of the Moon comes from. As the greatest harmony, how might this impact her? Yeah, the moon is our emotional body, and it's also part of our thinking, but it's our thinking along subliminal lines. So I like to think of Mercury as being the more left brain, rational, language-based, calculating side of the thinking, and the moon being the right side, which may be more emotional. I think it deals more with facial recognition, being able to form connections and identifications.
Instinct?
It's more our sense of instinct. And instinct's really important. One of the values of intuition is if it's working, it can actually bypass the laborious rational process. In states of emergency, you don't want to sit down and do an algebraic formula. You need to be able to be sensate and to move from gut feelings, and you need to be able to react. And the moon does that.
It's true.
And I think Radine's right because of its placement in the 7th house. That automatic, instinctual, empathic attunement to the other would be emphasized.
And who will the other be?
The spouse or lover.
Usually, but I think it
Business
can.
partners.
I think of 7th house ruling all one-on-one relationships, really.
All right, and if you're a musician, it's the other people in your band.
Mm-hmm.
It's those connections. So being able to connect well with others is going to be her best quality. Now, we also know, as Radine talked about the skirt off her backside, the moon's forming that trine to Jupiter. So she not only will feel connected empathetically to others, there's the desire to be benevolent to others.
And the downside of that could be that she might, Capricorn is I use. She might have sort of an unconscious way of using people that she was closely, in relationship with.
That can happen if it's harmonious. It becomes
Couldn't be
mutual
helpful. Yeah.
use, where I see how you can benefit me, you see how I can benefit you. Let's pool our talents and do something together. It's not just all standing on someone's neck in order to get ahead. So it can be recognizing mutual resources and mutual usefulness. What about the most discordant planet, Saturn? Well, it's the 8th house of death and other people's money. Well, if you're giving it all away, that can be a problem. She said that she would give it away even if she didn't have it. What happens if you give something that you don't have? You wind up in debt.
In the times where she worked, the promoters didn't want to pay you till after your set was done, and they cheated you because they wouldn't pay you once it was done. And she insisted that she be paid before she was singing, even if it meant announcing to the audience, I'm not singing because they haven't paid me. And she was very particular in that way, and that's how the tradition started, that the singers and musicians get paid before the concert's done. So even though she gives things away, she wasn't going to be cheated.
And that is something I remember about her as well, as she was the first person to institute that practice and pave the way.
Except for prostitutes.
Oh, yeah.
That's an age-old practice of prostitutes.
Money up front?
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Anybody who performs their services before they get paid is setting themselves up for that kind of vulnerability. But I find it really interesting that she made that public statement to the audience that this is why she wasn't performing yet. And therefore she legitimatized the whole practice of performers getting paid out front. That's awesome. That makes her a political figure.
It does. Look at Saturn's aspects. What really stands out are oppositions to Venus and Mars
That's not good.
and Pluto.
Christopher, with those oppositions and Saturn in the house of death, she was almost killed in a car accident
Plane.
before the plane accident.
Correct.
So is that something you would look at with Saturn in the 8th house or with the oppositions of both?
Well, I would look, actually there's a T-square. We've only just looked at the oppositions, but if we look at Uranus's influence, it becomes part of a T-square in her chart, involving friends, death, and money or personal possessions. Now, the constants for accidents are generally Mars and Uranus. And what is the aspect between Mars and Uranus in this chart?
Perfect square.
Yes, they're both at 22 degrees. In the chart, what we would call a predisposition. Can anyone tell me what it means to be predisposed?
Prone.
You're prone to something. Doesn't mean it has to happen, but it means the likelihood of something happening is greater. The reason I'm saying this is that not everyone in the world that has a Mars-Uranus square has to die in an accident. You're just predisposed. Life insurance never helps you, but it does help who you leave behind. So there is this tight T-square in her chart that we can't ignore. Mars and Pluto can represent
They're
drastic
tight.
occurrences.
They're very tight.
Yes, they're
They're 12 minutes apart.
12 minutes apart. Yeah, that's a powerful aspect. The losses in her chart coming through a discordant Saturn can be through death, through taxes, through joint financial arrangements, which, again, from what was described, she set about to change that. You're not going to take advantage of me, and I will let the public know what's going on here. 4th house, home and family. 2nd house, money. 10th house, career. How can that 10th house be so powerful? It's unoccupied. Aspects to the midheaven. And oppositions tend towards being significant aspects. The 10th house gains much of its power from the aspects received by the midheaven. It's the ascendant and the midheaven are the only house cusp that we measure aspects to, that we treat with the power of planets. Moon, even though it's not powerful, it's in the house of the public, and the moon can make you a household name. She entered a lot of people's homes. How did she do that?
TV,
And
radio.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. All right. Now, let's look here on screen. Where's the harmony? The greatest harmony is the 7th house. The greatest discord is the 8th house. All right, the 7th house is your partner, but the 8th house
Dad.
is your partner's money. She may have had a good marriage or a good companionship, but they may have had financial quarrels. Did anyone do any research on her marriage?
Yes, it's alleged that there was abuse, and the person, of course, who it's alleged against would disagree. So it's hard to say.
Moon is the 7th, that you wind up taking care of everybody else.
Correct. All right, and let's look at the signs. Dominant, Virgo, I analyze. Leo, I will. Cancer, I feel. Harmony, the greatest harmony is Virgo, and the greatest discord is Aquarius. So her best quality could be her analysis. Her worst quality? Argumentativeness, yeah. Her husband might say it wasn't abuse. I had to knock some sense into her, right? I am kidding. All right. Now, one of the things I love to do with charts is to look for the most powerful aspects. Look at the opposition from Mercury to the midheaven. Not only is that her most powerful aspect, it's also her most discordant aspect. Mercury, midheaven. Mercury's 29 Leo, 48. Midheaven's 28, Aquarius 57.
Yeah.
Less than a degree apart. That's a powerful aspect. Mercury's in an angular house, so it has even greater power. Do you think she could piss off bosses or authority figures?
Shoot off her mouth.
Yeah, or if you're standing on stage in front of the public saying, this guy's not paying me, I'm not going to sing.
Shaming people in public.
Right. So that's the most discordant aspect. But also it can impact the way in which one thinks about their career. Or it could also be for her that the midheaven's also the mother. Her relationship with the mother could have been difficult. She was very loyal to her mother, but it doesn't mean it was easy for her. All right, the next strongest aspect I see is a trine from the moon to Neptune. All right, what I want to do now is look at her progressions. We have 15 minutes left in class, so the first thing I want to do is go to time of death, which was March 5th, 1963. So we go up here to Tools, Progress Chart. We enter the date, being 3/5/1963. Hit OK, and we can see in the outer wheel that the aspects come up. We can also narrow our search if we want to see what aspects are in orb by progressing her chart. And I might pick as the beginning date 1/1/1963 and the end date 12/31/1963. All right, and these are all of the progressions in orb for that year. Almost too many to look at. So
yeah,
sometimes
what if we narrow it, since she died in March, what if we just do
March.
a 6-month span instead of the entire year?
Well, let's just look at the month of March. What are we going to look for in terms of death in a chart? Any thoughts? Mars, why?
Mars deals with accidents.
Accidents, injuries, infections, inflammations, sudden things. Uranus is also drastic turns of events. Well, we know in the natal chart, there is a constant showing a predisposition towards violence or violence deaths, and that's a T-square. Mars-Pluto conjunction opposing Saturn, squaring Uranus. There's a predisposition. But death is also the ebbing of the physical body. which would also mean we look towards aspects involving the ascendant, which is the soul's grounding wire to the physical body. And we might also look for aspects involving the sun, because the sun is our vitality. Now, if there weren't aspects here that gave me the information I wanted, I would look at everything. The parallels, the semi-squares, just to see what energy is going on. The other thing we could do is we could take this information and then we could go and look for transits as reinforcements at the time of death. So the Mercury, what's going on here? Opposing Uranus, squaring Mars, and Pluto. And what is the Sun doing?
Squaring the ascendant progressed.
Okay. We talked about the Sun in that it represents one's vitality, and the ascendant represents the physical body. Accidents,
She's had a few.
Mars, Uranus, natally involved in a square, and by progression, Mercury's opposing Uranus and squaring Mars. Why would Mercury be important in this matter?
It's the ruler of a chart.
Transportation.
Yeah, she's transportation.
Okay, and also she has Gemini rising, no planets in the first house, and Mercury becomes the ruler of the first house of health and physical body. Fourth house is described as being end of life, conditions surrounding the end of life.
I mean, I thought atheist has to do with that, but I thought leaving.
What about the house of death? Well, guess what? Saturn never, being retrograde at birth, Saturn never ventured very far from his natal position. So at death, Saturn was conjunct natal Saturn. So we have 8th house stimulation. We have the ruler of the first house in opposition to Uranus, sudden events, and squaring Mars, accidents and injuries, and the Sun squaring the ascendant, which is the loss of one's vital life force. The real tragedy in all of this is that it was her agent or manager who was flying the plane. This man had not been trained to fly using instrumentation, just trained to fly visually. Well, in a pouring rainstorm, when you can't see out the wipers that are going as fast as they can,
Vaya con Dios.
yes, go with God. And in this case, it may have been the faultiness of her own safety urges, or it could be the fault that someone else wasn't paying attention to what might have been a safety concern and decided to just push regardless.
Would her agent be in her,
7th house.
okay.
We'll look at the chart and view transits, and we'll go to tools and go back through our process again of, when I look at transits, I only look at conjunctions and oppositions, and I'm only looking really at the slower moving planets that have some possibility of being there for some time and creating energy. One transit going on at this time Look, she was at the height of her career. Midheaven sextile Saturn. We do have Saturn aspects going on, and her reputation was greatly expanded as a result of her death. And she continues to have sales. The good news is, we're informed they didn't suffer. Investigations at the time of the accident showed that everyone just died immediately. The plane went nose down into the ground. Curiously, what they could not find was the costume she had worn for her last performance and the money she had been paid. Those items were missing from the crash site. So, no transits for most of these. The biggest transit going on at this time is Jupiter passing over
You're looking at Jupiter conjunct her
Midheaven.
progressed midheaven. Did you?
These are start dates. This is when the aspect peaks. This is when it ends. So if it falls within that period, those aspects are still in the orb at the time
All
of the event.
transing aspects.
No, those are all major progressions. As you can see, it says there's no transits for this event, no transits, no
I
transits,
see,
no
yeah.
transits,
Oh,
no
okay,
transits.
gotcha. I hadn't read this kind of report before.
So,
Disapprove.
oh, it's the end of class, that's why.
Oh,
All right, so progressed Venus is at 2, ruler of the 12th is at 2 Virgo. I'm not seeing any aspect here. But the ascendant is moving through the second house of personal possessions. And the only transit in aspect came after. There was no transit that was active at the time of the event. Yeah, I thought it was, because also what happens when a celebrity goes down is the looters come out.
Right.
So not only do the investigators go to the site of the crash, but the looters do as well.
Yeah, whoever got there first.
Most people aren't going to turn in cash when they find it, unless they're
No.
incredibly ethical. Right, and it stopped at 6:20, so they assume that is the time of impact.
6:20 at night,
Yes.
so it was dark?
It was
Where-
dark,
where's
it was raining,
Hmm.
and the pilot did not know how to fly,
In
purely
Seattle.
guided by instrumentation.
Was anyone else on the plane?
There was, and I don't remember who they were, but online research can provide those details. If you want to look at it, I'll be back in 2 weeks. Paul will be teaching next week, and I believe he's going to start you off on progressions. So the following week, we can either go through a lifetime of progressions for Patsy, since we're already familiar with the chart, or we can pick another chart and do progressions. If you want to do that, then you need to email me, christopher@light.org, and let me know. If not, it's we're 10 minutes past the hour, so it's over and out for tonight. Thank you all for being here.
Oh, you.
thanks.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.